Hey guys, hope everybody's having an awesome night. I wanted to talk to you tonight about something that was kind of affecting me this week. And I kind of dove into it a little bit before, but I wanted to do something a little bit more in depth. So I did a pile of research, and this is kind of what I found out about how important sleep is for the process of recovery. And not only the process of recovery, but some possible mistakes that you might be making during your sleep. And I know I already ruined drinking for you guys, so I apologize for doing that. But I think it's a pretty important topic to talk about. And basically, what I've really kind of pulled up and what I knew before, but just studied a little bit more in depth tonight, was how important it is a good night's sleep is to healing, how important it is to fitness. And what I've found and what I always kind of say is that food is as important, or possibly even the nutrition that is as important or possibly more important than physical exercise itself. And you can't have one without the other. But one thing that I think that I've really come to realize tonight is that sleeping is just as important as nutrition, and it's just as important as your workout. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about how and why. So a research study that I kind of posted in the group, I believe it was either this challenge or the previous challenge, talked about what the ideal time is according to the latest studies for sleep. And the ideal time that they're finding is between 7 to 9 hours. To less than 7 hours or more than 9 hours actually is a detriment. So sleeping 12 hours a day, for example, not very good for your health, not very good for gains. Sleeping less than, also not very good for. And if you're interested in those articles, make a comment below. I'll pull those back up and I'll post them because it's pretty interesting. But I wanted to talk about the whole process of sleep and what actually occurs on a hormonal level when you sleep. And the answers are kind of shocking. So studies actually found that people who lack sleep do less well, is that a thing? Don't do as well on what's called the motor vigilance test, which is a test that's basically monitors the reaction time in correspondence to when they're given stimulus. And what the scientists actually found based on those studies is that lower mental and motor capacity was found with people who tend to sleep less or tend to have a sleep debt, so don't get enough sleep, or even those who get too much sleep. They performed significantly lower than their peers when they actually did these tests. Not only did they perform lower, but in the gym, it actually increases your chances of making mistakes. So when I refer to mistakes, and when I refer to just kind of missteps in life in general, maybe you're underneath the squat rack, and in a normal circumstance, you would check your weight twice, you would check your stance twice, you take the time to do an adequate warm up. We're more likely to make a mistake and actually injure yourself when you're in a state where you haven't slept adequately. So not sleeping actually equates to more injuries in the gym. So that makes it really important as well. What they actually found was that even though sleep doesn't necessarily affect your peak capabilities, and that means if you're going to bench press 100, 200, 300 pounds, it's not that you won't be able to bench it, but it's that you're actually going to get fatigued quicker. Another interesting thing that they found about people who tend to sleep less is that they have trouble metabolizing glucose. And of course, we all know that glucose is what happens when you break down carbohydrates, right? Glucose, the absolute most basic form of sugar. And that actually, a lack of sleep actually affects your ability to break down and process glucose as energy. And of course, that's going to affect your entire system. When you sleep, you release a few important really hormones. You guys know what I'm trying to say. You release a bunch of maybe I need more sleep. Well, we all know I need more sleep. But you release three hormones in particular that are extremely important. Number one is IGF, otherwise known as a precursor to growth hormone, right? And another one, interestingly enough, is of course testosterone. So if you're not getting adequate sleep, you're reducing the amount of growth hormone that you're secreting at night, and you're reducing the amount of testosterone that you're secreting at night. And as we all know, females have testosterone, and they require testosterone just as much as men, although it's in smaller amounts. So when you actually go to sleep, and not just when you go to sleep, but when you reach REM, which is that kind of deep sleep where all the magic happens, you start to release these hormones. And when you don't have a disruptive sleep and you're not able to achieve that same level of sleep, you don't release them at the same rate. And because you're not releasing the same amount of testosterone and you're not releasing the same amount of growth hormone, your body isn't able to repair itself as quick, and you're not able to metabolize things as fast. Another thing that they found had a significant amount of problems when you're sleeping, or something that causes a significant amount of problems rather, is actually your your sleep apnea. If you are diagnosed with sleep apnea, or you have somebody who you know somebody who's diagnosed with sleep apnea, and the telltale sign of sleep apnea is kind of that in the middle of the night, people wake up. And when you wake up, it disturbs your REM. So it disturbs your ability to release these hormones. And of course, if you're not releasing these hormones, you're not getting the same amount of gains out of all the hard work that you're putting in the gym. One of the main things and one of the main issues with sleep itself, and one of the beautiful things that happens in the human body, and I've spoken a lot about this in the last little while, is cortisol, right? Cortisol is probably the number one issue and the number one worst thing to happen to your gains, and to happen to, that's going to prevent you from progressing, right? And cortisol, as a lot of you guys are going to remember, is the stress hormone. So when you sleep, you actually reduce the amount of cortisol in your body. Reducing the amount of cortisol, of course, decreases your inflammation. It helps your body heal. And when your cortisol levels are really, really high, a bunch of bad things tend to happen. You tend to go catabolic. And catabolic means that your body starts using muscle. It starts tearing apart muscle rather than anabolic, where you're in a state where you're actually building muscle. So sleep is where your cortisol is reduced. That's when the body de-stresses. And cortisol is a major determinant in the amount of progress that you're going to get out of your sleep. So, of course, when you don't sleep properly and you don't reduce your cortisol enough, that stress hormone inside of your body, cortisol tends to do a bunch of negative things to your body. Inflammation is one of them, but as well, when you have high amounts of cortisol, you also tend to hold more body fat around your stomach. And of course, as I spoke about, your body tends to go more catabolic, the stress hormone. So you begin actually cannibalizing muscle in place of building muscle. Another interesting thing that they found is that if you're a napper, so if you sleep 5 minutes at night, and then you take like an hour nap during the day or a 2-hour nap during the day, that 2-hour nap during the day isn't effective because it actually throws off your circadian rhythm. And for anybody who isn't familiar with circadian rhythm, it just has to do with the human body's natural ebb and flow of sleep. Night owls, so people who tend to stay up later, actually lose more muscle mass in recent studies. And that really boils down to the shock that it has on your circadian rhythm and the shock that it has on your cortisol levels. People who slept 8 hours a night versus people who slept 5 hours a night lost the same amount of weight at nighttime, because of course night is the time where our body is doing all those beautiful things, and it's kind of, it's cleaning out and it's regenerating, and you're actually losing weight in your sleep. But people who slept 8 hours as opposed to 5 hours actually lost the same amount of weight. But as we all know, losing weight isn't the same as losing fat. And what they found is that those sleeping 8 hours lost 55% more fat while preserving 60% more muscle, right? So 55% more fat loss when you sleep 8 hours versus 5 hours, and you preserve 60% more muscle. So that's a huge factor. And when you really want to think about that, if you're sleeping 5 hours versus 8 hours, and you're doing the same amount of work and you're eating the same diet, who's going to get the better effects out of what they're doing? Essentially, of course, we all know the people who slept for 8 hours. So another really interesting thing that happens when you sleep, that doesn't happen when you sleep properly, and that they found in these studies, is that a lack of sleep actually increases your ghrelin hormone. So when you're sleep deprived, ghrelin, and ghrelin is the hunger hormone, actually increases in your body. And not only that, but I've spoken previously about leptin. And leptin is that hormone that comes in your body and lets you know you're full. So it actually decreases leptin while increasing cortisol. So you are not only burning less fat, but you're actually feeling less hungry, right? Leptin is that thing that lets your body know, okay, I'm full, I'm good. So you wake up and your body is substantially hungrier. You've lost less fat, and you don't get full as quickly, essentially. So I thought that was really interesting. And when it really boils down to it, the results of sleeping 8 hours versus sleeping 5 hours on a physiological level are absolutely massive. We're talking about 55% less fat loss when you're sleeping 5 hours. Now, the same amount of weight, but 55% less fat and 60% better muscle preservation. So I thought that was really interesting. What does that tell us? That tells us that Matt needs to sleep more. And it also tells us that a lot of you guys probably need to sleep more too. I think in the North American society, we're so hardwired for less sleep, sacrifice more, work harder, do more, push, But in reality, it's having a huge detriment to our body. And we're so kind of accustomed to think that 5 hours a night, 6 hours a night is okay. But when you put these numbers in comparison, you say that if I sleep that 8 hours versus that 5 hours, I'm burning 55% more fat. Like, that's a huge factor. So I thought that that was really interesting. I also dug up some studies, and yes, I'm actually going to do this. I dug up some studies that are going to allow you to sleep better, or at least a few habits that are decreasing, or a few habits that you do or that you could potentially be doing when you sleep that actually affect your overall progress. One of the best things that you can do before you sleep, and I've talked before about stretching, right? Static stretching is those long hold stretches. And when you do them before a workout, you can actually decrease your athletic capability and your actual movement potential. So your flexibility and a bunch of other things. So those long hold stretches before you work out are not ideal, right? Static stretching, not ideal. What you really want to do are the quick touches, right? Otherwise known as dynamic stretching. So if you do that before you go to bed, when you sleep, your muscle fibers actually shrink, right? So when your muscle fibers shrink, they tighten up and your whole muscle tightens up. But when you take the time to stretch right before you go to bed, it actually pulls those muscle fibers out and it gives them a better chance to heal. And it means that you're going to be less sore when you wake up the next day. So I always recommend that right before you go to bed, you spend 10, 15 minutes. If you're going to do static stretching, right before you sleep is the absolute best time to do static stretching. Now, this was new to me, and I'm sure it'll be new to a lot of you guys. I know a lot of people who like to go to bed and they like to cocoon themselves, right? So you tuck your sheets in tightly and you lie down and your feet are hanging out. But what happens when you tuck your sheets down tightly to your feet, right? You tuck your sheets down tightly and it tends to put pressure on your ankles. And that pressure on your ankles for whatever it is, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours while you're sleeping, actually puts pressure on the muscle. And when you wake up the next day, they're more fatigued and they have more pressure on them and more stress. So they tend to be weakened. So one of the worst things that you can do is actually tuck your sheets in tightly around your bed before you go to bed. Forces the ankles down, leading to tight calves as well and possible injury. So you want to keep your calves loose. So one of the worst things that you can do is tuck your sheets in. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Another little thing that I dug up, which I found also very interesting, was the type of pillow that you're using. I know a lot of us like to get those nice, soft, beautiful pillows, and we lie down and we sink into them, and we want to avoid that. We want to avoid that flat kind of harder pillow. But what happens when you're lying down in a position and your neck is kind of cranked like that? You might feel like you're comfortable, but when your neck isn't perfectly elongated and when you don't have that perfectly straight spine, you're actually putting a ton of stress not only on your neck, but your back and your shoulders. So for that 8 hours when you're sleeping, if your neck is even like that, you wake up the next morning and you're sore, you're a little bit more fatigued, you're also more prone to injury, and it's going to affect your posture. So the worst thing that you can do is get those super comfortable pillows, stack them 10 high, and kick back and relax. The type of pillow that you choose tends to affect the amount of stress that you put on your body at night. And the ideal pillow is the type of pillow that's maybe a little bit harder and is going to give you that perfectly straight, elongated spine without a creak in your neck. So the type of pillow that you have will affect your sleep and it will affect your overall health. Another thing that people tend to do, which can actually affect your sleep, is when you reach up, and some people like to sleep with their hand behind their head. And when you do that, you are actually putting stress, excuse me, you're actually creating flexion in your shoulder. So as you can see, if I'm lying back down on a bed, I tuck my hand over top of my pillow, the angle at which my shoulder is postured is not a good thing. You wake up in the morning and your shoulder is weakened, you tend to be more prone to shoulder injuries and you tend to have more fatigued shoulders. So if you're going to do that and you're going to sleep on a pillow, and you're going to have your head up at your neck, it's recommended that you don't, but if that's the way that you sleep, I'm not telling you to change the way that you sleep. The best thing to do is actually to get used to putting that hand underneath your pillow. And when you take the time to put your hand underneath your pillow, you don't have the same amount of shoulder flexion. I'm going to see if I can kind of show you, right? So it's here where your shoulder is flexed and in a forward position versus underneath your pillow. If you're one of those people who can't sleep without it and your shoulder is back, it's a lot more straight. It's still not ideal because you're still putting a ton of stress on your shoulders, you're weakening your shoulders, but it's a lot better than actually slipping it underneath your head with your arm in a position where it's pushed forward. Another thing is stomach sleeping. I know some of you guys are stomach sleeping, but when you sleep on your stomach as well, it also, of course, you've got the straight back, and of course your neck is pushed up into this position where your spine is no longer straight. And that can put an immense amount of pressure on your spine. So if at all possible, you don't want to be the person who sleeps on their stomach. The best way to sleep ideally is on your back with a straight, flat pillow that keeps your spine in a nice, soft, straight shape, because ultimately that's going to help your posture. It's going to keep your spine in a perfect level, and you're going to get a better, deeper, more restful sleep. Another thing that people do that can actually affect your sleep is the fetal position. The fetal position is one of the absolute worst positions that you can possibly sleep in. And the reason for that is it boils down to your hip. When you're lying down on your side, you have your feet, they're tucked in like this. It puts an immense amount of pressure on both your hip, your knees, and your legs. And that pressure over a series of hours, minutes, hours, days, years, puts a ton of pressure on your hip, and that pressure on your hip can actually lead to imbalances, and not only imbalances, but injuries in the gym by fatiguing them when you sleep. So fetal position is bad. However, if you must sleep in fetal position, what they recommend that you do is you actually take a pillow and you tuck it in between your legs. And by tucking it in between your legs, you don't have one leg that's kind of on an angle. It more straightens out. It straightens out your legs a little bit more and just creates less hip flexion, which means less fatigued hips and overall a better, more restful night's sleep with less pressure on your actual hips itself. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. Another thing that people do, which can actually affect your sleep, and I'm guilty of it as well, and it's something that I'm going to stop doing, is that big glass of water right before you go to bed. Now, when you go to bed, of course, your body dehydrates, and it's really important that you go to sleep when you're hydrated, because when you're hydrated, your body digests better, you wake up more hydrated, and just, things are transported around your body better, of course, because you have more moisture to do it. And of course, digestion is 100 times better as well. What they actually recommend that you do is that instead of waiting until the last minute before you go to bed, you have that drink 1 hour before you go to bed. You drink a massive glass of water 1 hour before you go to bed. Because what happens when you drink a ton of water before you go to sleep? You tend to wake up more, you tend to disturb that REM sleep where all the beautiful things happen, and you tend to use the bathroom more. So by having it at kind of, your last serious influx of water and still remaining hydrated about an hour before you go to sleep, you're going to reduce the amount of bathroom breaks that you have to take, and you're ultimately going to have a better, more restful sleep because of it, because you're not disturbing that REM. And by disturbing that REM, as we said, right, less testosterone secretion, less GH secretion, and just a less restful sleep. You're more sleep deprived, right? Less leptin, telling you you're full, more cortisol. So I thought that was really interesting too. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that these are a couple of tips that are going to help you. Sleeping is super, super important. It's just as important in the equation as eating, and it's just as important in the equation as the work that you put in at the gym. And if you've ever had a friend who you're working out with, and maybe they're not eating as well as you, and maybe they're getting better results, and maybe they're not even training as hard as you. One of the things that you could be missing is sleep. You got to sleep. And it's funny because after this rant, you guys are all probably thinking, but Matt, you've talked about how you slept for only 3 hours all week. And absolutely. So it's been a good learning exercise for me too. And it's been, it's one thing that my plan is to focus better on this week. I just wanted to pass that information on to you guys because I thought it was super interesting. So 8 to 6 hours sleep is ideal. You know what I mean? And there's those couple of little tricks to help you sleep a little bit better. Hydrate 1 hour before you go to bed. Sleep is where the magic happens on a hormonal level, and that determines the amount of body fat that you lose. It determines how much muscle you actually build and how much muscle you actually cannibalize. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Sorry for being such a long video, but I thought it was important information. I wanted to pass it on. I hope you guys all have an amazing night, and we will talk to you guys super, super soon. Kill your workouts, have fun, keep smiling, and have a great day. We'll see you soon.